No one cares.
Nobody cares.
Nate, just delete it. Just delete it.
This morning with a bad hangover, and my penis was missing again. This happens all the time. It's detachable.
Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm here with Tom Roberge from New Directions in Albertine. And we're going to talk about a few things this week, starting with some information about gender in translation and women in translation. But I was going to launch right into that, but actually I want to ask you. You told me that someone came to the store because of our podcast.
Yes. This was probably not this past weekend. We're recording this on Tuesday the 27th. So it would have been like 10 days ago on a Saturday. I was in the store and this woman bought, I'm going to blank, a copy of like Tram 83 and then like Nausea or something like that. And asked me, if I had read Tram 83. I said, yeah, it's great, whatever. And she's like, yeah, I heard about it on this podcast. And I was like, what podcast? And she said, the 3% Podcast. And I was like, that's me. And she's like, oh, I thought it was you. She's like, I had only heard of the store, Albertine, because of the podcast. And I was hoping you'd be here. I was like, oh, yeah. And so she was visiting from Portland with her mother. And is a fan of the podcast. She requested we do more of them. But,
yeah.
Which, common complaint. But hey, look, we're trying to run businesses here. We've got things to do. Also, there's not that much to talk about.
I know if we did more news things or something, that would make more sense. Maybe.
Right. But the news is it's hard to do the news on a podcast unless you do it literally every day.
Yeah.
It's just the cycle of news attention and everything's been beaten to death. 10 minutes after the item itself comes out. I mean, it's horribly gotten to this point in our culture where Slate will inevitably publish a thing that says, like, what we mean when we talk about X. And you're just like, all right, done with this topic, moving on. Anyway, back to our loyal fan, loyal listener. She was in Portland with her mother, and she was going around to all the bookstores in the city. Clearly a book lover, and her poor mother, really not into the books, but was indulging her daughter, and the trade-off was that they were going to shoe stores over on Madison Avenue after. So,
oh, wow.
Anyway, so hello. She asked me not to call her out.
Okay.
Anyway, but thanks for listening, and it's great to know that, we are actually reaching people that aren't literary critics or our significant others. So.
Yeah. we have listeners, and they actually act upon the fact that the podcast exists.
Yes, even better. Then perhaps they will actually buy books we talk about and visit places we recommend and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so going away from that, the first thing we were going to talk about was this post on women in translation, part 1, 14 countries, that I put up on the 5th of October, and I can relink to it on this particular podcast post. And this is based on the translation database that we've been collecting data on since 2008 of all the books that are published in translation for the first time ever here in the States. And for a long time, I've run reports that are basically like, here's, the total number of books went up to like 560. And they have it broken down by country, by language, by publisher, poetry versus fiction. So you can sort of see all that. And what I started doing this summer with the help of a few interns is coding in so that we know if the author is male or female and if the translator is male or female. And I also include a both just to make this all clear right up front, where if it's two translators and they're not of the same gender, then it becomes both. If it's an anthology that's not just male or female, it becomes both. So that accounts for, like, sometimes if you look at this data, it'll be like, this doesn't add up to 100%, and that's why. It's because there's I don't know, X number of books that fall in that category that are just, like, mixed. So in this particular post, the first thing I did was I have general information, which we've sort of talked about before, and isn't very surprising. If you total up, and it should be, but it's not, if you total up 2008 through 2014, there were 2,471 works of fiction published in translation. 72% of those were by men. And for poetry, there's 571 books. 384 of them, or 67%, were by men. So as a total, 70% of all the translations published over the past, 7 years, are by men, which is a huge number.
Yes, it is. It's, but you follow it up with, you thought the split would be more like 60-40, not 71-27. And I agree with you. I really thought it would be something, I don't know, 60-63, something like that.
Yeah.
Especially because we have this thing over and over again where we know that women buy more books.
Mm-hmm.
Women read more books per year. Didn't we just, as a side note, get this thing from, I forget who, USA Today or something like this, had this stat that something like 25% of Americans didn't read one book this year.
28%. Now, I'll make a statement on that, is that if you eliminated Harry Potter, 50 Shades of Grey, Hunger Games, and Twilight, I'll bet you that number is closer to 50% of people didn't read a book if those ones didn't count. Because I'll bet a huge number of them only read like Harry Potter or 50 Shades of Grey. But yeah,
or like, Who Moved My Cheese or whatever.
Yeah. Good to great. But 28% didn't read anything, which is a huge, that's an insane number too.
It's depressing in and of itself. But of the, 75% of the American adult population that does read books, more of them are women than men. And I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it's not like it's 51% just mirroring the actual population. It really is closer to 60%, which you would think would indicate to publishers that they should be publishing more female authors than male authors.
Yeah.
So this is going to be impossible to compare. But do we have any concept of how many books in general, how many novels published not by self-publishers in the same time period? What do you think the percentage is, male, female authors?
According to something from 2011, it looks like, no, this is not true. My guess is that there's still probably more men that are published than women, but it's probably closer to like 55%.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I would agree with that.
The thing that gets tricky with that, though, is that there are an insane number of romance books that are published, and a vast majority are written by women. So it's possible that balances it out a little bit.
There's also, on the other side, an insane number of fantasy series books written by men. So
yeah, but I would guess there's still more men, but not 71%.
No, certainly not. So the takeaway is that most of what's being, and 71% is most. Let's call it what it is, are by men, and it's kind of depressing, as you say.
Yeah, and then this post I broke it down with there's one other side note, is if we couldn't determine, we went by whatever pronoun the person used. So in their bios, if it said she, then it was a she. We couldn't handle figuring out if there's any other transgender or anything else along those lines. It's just beyond the scope of what we're able to do. But if we couldn't find out who the person was, there's certain people who are intentionally mysterious, like this D.E. Brooke that translated the Rogue Gray novel. They just got categorized as both. I think there's only 3 people that happened with, that we just literally could not figure out who the person was. But putting that aside, so then this first thing after getting the general numbers was to put in by country how many authors from Afghanistan were male, how many were female for every single country, all the way through. How many are there here? I think there's 100. Yeah. And for this, there are only 14 in which there is an equal number of males and female authors, or there are more females than men. But all of these are basically insignificant. Armenia had 1 male, 1 female. Belarus 2 males, 3 females. Costa Rica 1 and 1. Croatia 4 and 4. The only one that's like actually significant is Finland with 10 males and 18 females, and that's primarily like crime books. And then when you go to like the other part of this post where it has like the bigger countries, so to speak, like Argentina, China, France, Germany, Italy, they're all like 33% women, 20, 27, 35 for Germany, 23 for Italy, 28 for Japan, 23 for Russia, 24 for Spain, and 36 for Sweden. So the bigger countries, it's like that's mirroring that 71% almost exactly, and that even being more in that direction. Which seems weird to me, because I would think like the bigger countries would be more attuned to being equal.
Right, but it's still incumbent on American publishers to choose what to publish. It's not
Right. I just mean I would see that there'd be more offers. It'd be easier in some sense to like identify female authors from Italy than say from like Ecuador. Since we have more choices, so it'd be easier. You have more choices as an American publisher to find male and female authors from China or France, and I think that would then allow it to be more equal. Whereas with some of the smaller countries, it's going to be hit or miss, like who you find out about. From Bulgaria, it could be a male, it could be a female, but it's going to be like a couple people that you're choosing from, not 100.
Right, but in the end, just because you have more choice doesn't mean that you're going to choose the female author.
No. Obviously not, because that didn't happen.
Which kind of gets us to, the underlying reasons that this happens and how it can be addressed, right? So, like I say, it's incumbent upon American publishers to sort of, try to create balance as much as possible. But it's also the responsibility of the agents, of the organizations, if they exist. I mean, obviously they exist in places like Germany and France.
Yeah.
I don't know about many other countries, to be honest. But Israel, there are organizations, foundations, whether they're state-run or not, that also try to get their books published in translation in English. And if they are themselves choosing, at a 7-3 clip, male authors to push forward, then, they bear some responsibility here as well.
Yeah.
So I've never been an editor dealing with, acquiring books quite on a scale that you have, and I'm just curious if, you've been doing this for what?
15 years? 15. I'm old now.
If you could, looking back, do you feel like what you're getting, and I assume you get pitched, ungodly amounts of things.
Yeah.
Feel more, like significantly more male than female?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think that there are far more male authors that are presented to us. They tend to be, and this is a reflection on the culture too. Like if we're looking for the great book, so to speak, it's much more likely that a German author who's male or a French author who's male is going to be presented to us as like, oh, this great author of France who's obviously a male. And there's that sort of underlying prejudice to it. But I think that there's just more books that are coming to us that are written by males. We've always tried to be as balanced as possible. It's never going to be like I never at Delkey or at Open Letter set like a quota where it has to be 5 and 5 or it has to be anything like that. But we were always aware of it and tried to like make sure that we were getting a number of female authors in there, but wasn't like prescribed by any means. And I think that we'll have the part that I'm doing now is figuring out the publishers, like how many male and females were published by every single publisher. So I'll see where we are, but I think we're at probably 35-40% female for Open Letter, and Delkey nowadays is it's almost all dudes. But yeah, so it is, and it is like you say, it's on us. It's our responsibility to make those choices. You don't always have the same amount of options that are being presented, but you could obviously go out of your way and find a great author, a great female author from any one of these countries if you set your mind to it and paid attention to it. It's not impossible by any means. So there's not really a good excuse for the imbalance in that sense.
No, and I will say, having been, close party to a lot of acquisitions, editorial acquisitions and decisions over the years, not just New Directions and Penguin, but just, knowing what people have their eye on and where they're going and what they're looking at and things like that. So often, and correct me if I'm wrong, so often, publishers will take on a book that they don't necessarily love, but might want because it adds something to the list, or they think there's a chance it'll break out. And, by the time they actually publish it, they're obviously behind it. It's just, during the acquisition process, they are not 100% sure.
Yeah.
And if every time a publisher was not 100% certain with a male author and they just said, we'll pass, and spent the next, week, maybe an hour a day trying to track down something by a woman that they were 100% sure about, they would find it. Yeah. It would not be hard. And it would do so much to sort of balance out the lists and, enable readers to really understand that there's more out there. And that's, the goal of all of this even if you're New Directions and you're a for-profit, the goal of this is sort of introduce readers to new and different things to get them coming back and buying more and more, right? You want to keep their curiosity and keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is kind of shocking. What do you think of And Other Stories deciding to do only female authors for a whole year?
That's great. What happens after that? Do they commit 50-50? What happens? I don't know.
I'm not sure what they're going to do with it.
I think it's a good thing. And it'll be curious to see what the sort of marketing around it is, both on a per book level, how they're presenting each book as part of this series, and whether, whatever, this catalog for this year, and whether or not they try to group them all together, because that doesn't always work. You can't just say, hey, here's a bunch of books by women. That doesn't inherently make them anything like each other or marketable as a group in any way.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious. Look, I'm very cynical. I get that. I'm also curious just how much of this is a
marketing ploy.
Not a marketing ploy. They really want to be pat on the back for this, right?
Yeah, I could see that. It was like, who was it that there's someone made a call for this, for a year of publishing women. It was in The Guardian. There was an article about it, and they responded, and then Other Stories responded to that, saying we can do this.
Was it not Rob Spillman?
I don't know. No. It's Camilla Shamsi, or I think that's how you say her name. She made a call for direct action for 1 year to publish, in 2018 people only publish women authors. That's what And Other Stories is doing. But she was the one who said it in a speech that she gave, or in an article that she wrote.
And they jumped on it.
Yeah, here's her quote. At this point, I'm going to assume that the only people who really doubt that there's a gender bias going on are those who stick with the idea that men are better writers and better critics, wrote Shamsi. Enough, across the board, enough. I would argue that it is time for everyone, male and female, to sign up to a concerted campaign to redress the inequality. Why not have a year of publishing women? 2018, the centenary of women over the age of 30 getting the vote in the UK seems appropriate. And then And Other Stories said, well, we could do that. They publish 10 to 12 books a year. It's totally doable. It's not like they're having, publishing 100 books and they're all going to be women. It's only going to be 10 or 12. So it's a reasonable switch or whatever to work into their schedule.
Of course, it's going to screw up their schedule for the year before and the year after.
Yeah, it'll be all dudes the year before and the year after because they have to burn off those books that they've acquired.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It is sort of like a marketing thing and a pat on the back thing, but it is at least someone doing something about it. I don't know that I think it would be hard for us to do that, but we do have the Danish Women Writers series, which is only doing women writers from Denmark that we got funding for through the government. And so far for the Korean books that we're signing on, they're all women too. So there's been some, and we've made some effort in those regards to like, okay, we're looking mostly at women's books here. Why don't we try and make like our whole series women? And that's one way to address it or to do something.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I honestly have no concept of where New Directions is going to fall on this, but
I could tell you in a second. I could figure out simple ones like that. So New Directions has, in the whole database, fiction and nonfiction, 78 books by men and 17 by women.
no.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
At 17 is not a great proportion. Let's see what open letter is. Open letter male is, oh, come on. We lose one of our main females, too. We have 49 males and 16 women. So we're slightly better, but not by much. But we lose all of our nonfiction ones because those aren't in here. So, like, the Dubravka Greshik books don't count.
Right. I mean, we also publish a lot of non-translated stuff by women.
Right,
Like,
exactly, yeah. And this is just on that part. But it is still not great for either one of us. The one that when this event took place at Albertine with all the people that were on there, they were the ones who pointed out that Delkey had done I think it was 0 women over the past year. Here's their numbers: males 172 and female 31. That's 85%.
Jesus.
That's really that seems almost impossible to be an accident. Like that seems off of the normal standard distribution of like where things would go. Like if you just did it randomly, you wouldn't end up with 85%. But then again, whatever. That is sort of, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but it's sort of a good segue that the Neustadt Prize was announced on Saturday or Friday night, I guess it was, and Dubravka Greshik won that. It's the Neustadt's considered they refer to it constantly as the American Nobel Prize because it has a $50,000 cash prize. It's awarded every other year, and in intermediate years, it's awarded to someone for children's literature. It's for international authors. It's got a similar sort of. It doesn't have like a Swedish Academy, but a similar setup of judges that confer and award it for author's entire body of work. And it's cool that she won, which means that Delkey won both the Neustadt and the Nobel Prize, both with female authors. And with Dubravka, she was published by New Directions and Delkey and Penguin and Northwestern and Open Letter now, and Echo and Grove. She has a lot of publishers, but all three of us, the two of us were involved in, or at least our presses were involved in a number of her books. So we sort of all won.
Yes. This is a great thing for her, and it does generally, signal better things in the future. Not that this isn't a good thing, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I will say it's great that it's a woman from Dalkey in addition to the Nobel Prize that they got. It's not going to change a damn thing at Dalkey.
Oh, yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, absolutely not.
No, it's really unfortunate.
Do you know what? This is super sad. I just looked to see what her sales rank was for her books or whatever on Amazon, and it doesn't look like they've changed a whole lot. But
I was going to say, I don't think it's most American readers, even the literary folks we know on Twitter and whatever, really pay much attention to this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. The people that Porachista Krakpour, or how do you say her name? She's was one of the judges, I believe. So I saw her. She was the first person I saw tweet about it, actually, which is nice. But the thing that I was going to say is I clicked on "Thank You for Not Reading," which is the first book of hers that I acquired at Delkey, and is the one that I think a lot of people know her from because it did extraordinarily well for us and got her a lot of attention. It is out of print. Yeah,
they have a lot of things like that keep happening. I can tell you as a bookseller trying to order things. Every once in a while, it's just not available.
That's frustrating. That's
They
such
do
a
eventually come back.
okay. Well, now they have Ingram. Ingram can just print out like 12 copies, right? Keep them in their warehouse.
Shitty looking copies.
That's one of those. Not to bash on this, but for Voices from Chernobyl for Alexeyevich, the paperbacks there. You were talking about the hardcover version last time we did the podcast and how they were going to do a bunch of hardcover versions. It is still temporarily out of stock at Amazon, and I don't think I can't imagine anyone's buying this at all. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But maybe some good booksellers out there will order some copies and try to hype her up as much as they can.
Didn't one of New Direction's authors win the last Newstat prize?
I was trying to remember that. Was it not Oslo?
That's what I was going to say, and I was like, I don't know if that's true. He's won so many things.
Exactly. Or was it Ira?
Their website's not loading fast enough for me to find out. It's just spinning there.
I can't spell Newstat. There we go.
That is a problem too. for anyone who's like,
no.
Yeah, it's just not coming up. Oh, there we go. Okay, it wasn't. It was Miyakoto, Kuto, however you say that. The Mozambique author, but I think one of the authors is a finalist because I feel like we talked about this. Yeah, Caesar Ira was a finalist.
He was a finalist, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. But they do have a note on here, just to tie this all together, too, that this year for the Newstat Prize was the first year that the finalists, the majority were women. So,
Transtromer is on here, 1990. Octavio Paz, 1982.
This goes back a lot longer than I thought it did.
I totally agree. Miloš won it in 78.
Garcia Marquez, Skorbecki, Max Frisch in 1986.
Yeah, that's great.
Wow.
His picture is fantastic.
I gotta see that. He's awesome.
So that's great. What else?
We're going to talk about you being in the paper for the Welbeck.
Yeah, paper. I don't know if this will appear in the press. Télérama is a French magazine along the lines of, I really can't even. It's just a media magazine. It's like Entertainment Weekly. I think that's probably the best, except with more book coverage because it's France.
Yeah.
So I got a text last Tuesday, which was last Monday, the day before submission. Welbeck's book was being released here in the U.S. in English translation. I got a text late Monday night, my boss telling me he forgot he had gotten a phone call from someone at Télérama about Welbeck and its release here in the U.S. and that my boss had given my phone number to this journalist and that the journalist would be calling me the following morning. So last week, Tuesday morning, I got a phone call and I talked to this journalist about, Welbeck's reception here in the U.S. and blah, 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 and that sort of thing. And so later the next day, there's this article that it's in French. So I'm just roughly translating here. France didn't. The title is the French didn't understand soumission as well as the French didn't understand soumission according to the American press, and it goes on to quote a bunch of who we got here: the New York Times, all the reviews basically. There's some quotes from the New Yorker. There's a quote from Lorenstein himself, the translator. All these things about the way it's being reviewed in the U.S. So, of course, Adam Gopnik. The way it's being reviewed in the U.S. as opposed to the I don't know, furor that sort of existed in France at the time, largely due, I would have to say, to it being him being on the cover of Charlie Hebdo the week that the massacre happened.
Yeah.
And I we'll say, and so he asked me, like, what did you think of the book? What do you think? Why do you think people have gotten it wrong? And blah, blah, blah. And so I said, I think the book isn't necessarily about, the horrors of a Muslim government. I think it's actually more about the way that everyday French people, middle income, petit bourgeois, just sort of went along with it and will go along with anything so long as their livelihood isn't screwed up. They're not going to fight back. They're not going to fight against, the sudden declarations that women can't work and that all men have to, convert to Islam and all of that sort of thing. So long as their money is good, they're just going to go along with it and be just fine.
Yeah.
And that's, Welbeck's indictment of the French. And to me, that was the point of the book. That's why the book is called Submission, for Christ's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we had this long talk. It was like 15 minutes. And then, of course, it all got cut. He asked me at one point, why do you think, do I think that Welbeck is the most well-known French author, contemporary French author in the U.S.? And I thought for a minute, and I was like, I can't honestly think of anyone else. So it must be. I guess the only comparison would be like Muriel Barbary or something. I really don't even know.
But there's no new book coming out, so.
Right. Anyway, and so he asked me, he's like, well, why do you think people read Welbeck? And I said, well, if you look at the sales number, he hasn't actually been read all that much. And he told me 50,000 copies got printed of this. Did you know that?
I was going to ask you if it was selling for you guys. It's on Amazon's ranking, it's 1,335, which is pretty solid, but like, that's insane. 50,000?
50,000 copies they printed.
I can't imagine they're going to sell that many.
No, that seems ridiculous. I mean, who knows? Who knows? I will say I was in, so we sold, I don't know, maybe a dozen copies in a week.
Okay.
But we have sold, it is our best-selling book in French.
Oh, okay.
So we've sold 500 copies of the French edition. I will say I had lunch with my mother yesterday, who was visiting New York, and we ended up, of course, stopping by McNally Jackson. And my mother, God bless her, pays attention to what I do in the world. And we kept seeing, we saw the book on the table and then face out in the French literature section, which, if for those who don't know, McNally Jackson's literature section is broken up into region.
Right.
So you have all French literature together, Spanish literature together, then South American literature. Anyway, so it was face out in the French literature section. And then we get to the counter, and there's also a pile on display right next to the cash register.
Wow.
And so I just told my mother about that they printed 50,000 copies, and I think it'll be a bestseller, blah, blah, blah. And I asked the guy who was working at the counter, I was like, do you know offhand how many you've sold? And he said, between 40 and 50.
Wow.
So, not bad.
That's solid.
That's pretty specific to McNally Jackson, I think. I was in Greenlight 2 or 3 days after it had opened, and I asked, after the book had come out, and I asked if they had sold any, and they looked it up, and they hadn't sold one. So,
wow.
Who knows? 50,000 seems rather ambitious.
Yeah, I would say so too. But I mean, maybe. But in part, maybe they're trying to think that they'd get a lot of attention because of the Charlie Hebdo thing. That they would that would just be like, oh, well, we'll just buy this because then we'll know more about that because it was on the cover in that situation. But yeah, 50,000 seems like there's not that many literary readers in America. It's not. No. It's not like a pot boiler. It's not one of those books. But
I get a lot of people who come in who either mostly Americans and either they buy it in French or the people who've been asking for it in English. I mean, for months now, and they think it's a book about terrorists taking over the government. They don't really understand what it is. And I try to explain it, and they're still interested, but they think, oh, this was presented to me very differently. And I'm thinking, where was this presented to you this way? It seems very odd.
I don't understand that either. I mean, I read this a while ago too, not as long ago as you did, but a few months back. So, but it doesn't. It's not that. That's not what this book is.
Oh, anyway, so in the article, I looked it up because I was like, oh, I'm very curious to know what of all the things I said, what he took from me. So on the very, I have the last word. So it says, according to me, I'm
An expert.
No, specialist.
Oh, specialist, yeah.
I'm a Michel Houellebecq specialist. The author appeals to Americans because his writing addresses contemporary reality. And compared to Patrick Modiano, for example, I did not mean to slam Patrick Modiano. Modiano writes about the occupation, 65 years ago, whereas Houellebecq is writing about contemporary society.
Yeah.
And I said that Houellebecq writes about, contemporary times, today's times, just like Sartre and Camus before him. So that was how it ended. So yes, I am now a specialist to Michel Houellebecq.
Well, you did introduce that movie too, right?
I did. That was great. I get to really lay out the case for Michel Houellebecq. That was fun.
Have you convinced Michael Reynolds to read him yet?
No, I don't even talk to him about it. I just assume he has absolutely no interest, which is very weird to me, considering I know his taste generally, and you would think he would be interested. But
yeah, I don't know. Weird. Very weird. You said we got an email too, right?
No, that's not what I was talking about. You had sent me something last week from the Alta.
Oh, right. Yes, I did send that to you about the different countries.
Yes. Do we have time to go into this?
Yeah, we've got some time. We've got a few minutes here. Do you have it in front of you?
I do. You want me to read it?
Yes.
Should I? I mean, this was not public.
Well, if you want to summarize it.
Okay. Or I just won't say who it is. How about that?
Yes, that's fair enough.
No, even then it's going to be. All right. All right, I'm just going to summarize it because it's going to get too specific.
Right.
So basically, an Israeli translator met with a translation fund that is funded by both public and private money, and that gives out grants for people to translate Hebrew literature into English. I presume English. Well, it could be other languages as well. Anyway, there's this weird catch-22 wrapped up in this sort of fund that works this way, and that is whether or not the money should go to translators that already have a contract with a publisher in the U.S., or if they should be, much like the Penn grants, given the money to finish the translation, and then at that point try to find a publisher, because that way it's easier to convince the publisher because you've got a complete translation. And basically the question this person was asking was like, how are all these other things done when they're from the country? And it seems that only, to my mind, like the problem with only funding things that already have deals, you sort of miss the boat on sort of the more interesting sort of literature that might find a home if only people had more of the original, more translation to read from in order to choose it, right?
Right.
Like, I could go on and on telling you about how great a French author is, but without a sample translation, I mean, you're not going to buy it.
Right.
That's all there is to it, right? So you need something to base it on. And for a lot of books, a lot of books that we like, the really good books, 10 pages is just not going to get it done. You need to really understand the scope of it. And yes, there are readers' reports and all that sort of thing, but you're still trusting somebody else in that scenario. And when you're paying for the rights and devoting publisher resources and man hours to these things, it's a big risk no matter what, unless you can actually read the whole thing. And so maybe you know more about this. I mean, I don't know what answers were given to this person's question, but
I never actually followed up to see what answers are given either, but I do know that certain countries do it differently. They're already, Israel's already unique insofar as that they're funding the translator more or less directly with this. Whereas a lot of the other places, it's like after the publisher publishes the book, you'll get a translation grant from that particular country. So say like you're doing a Danish book or Norwegian book or whatever, you send in the application, you pay the translator does the full translation, you publish the book, and then you send your copies, and then they give you the grant money back. Whereas places like Korea, they have a list that they'll create of like the books that they want to have translated, and they'll fund the translator directly to translate those books, which then they can shop around to different publishing houses. And it really is a tricky scenario, because if you invest in if the government's making the decision as to which books are getting funded, and they're paying the translator to do those without a publisher, that might be a skewed vision of like what the country's literature represents. But at the same time, if they're only relying upon publishers to do it, to all the problems that you say, there's not enough of a sample to interest someone. Plus, like the publishers might be choosing things that are just purely commercial and not supporting things that are more artistic and could find a home in a different way. So there has to be some sort of balance, but it's a tricky situation. But a lot of countries don't have enough money to make to even have this be a problem. So like I think that the fund that's being referenced here there's reference that has both public and private money. So I think it's actually pretty well funded, and the Korean government's very well funded. But some other places, like, they're really, if someone comes along and is going to do a Romanian book, they'll have money for that, but they're not going they don't have a ton of money to invest in getting things translated without anyone there to publish it, because they don't have a large enough fund, right? So it's kind of a nice position for certain countries to be in, but it is really tricky, I think, because you have to get the right balance there. You don't want it to be all one or all the other, because neither one of those is going to work very well.
I totally agree, and I think what the person was asking is, like, it's great to what it's said here. It's all very well to throw money at a translation, but how can the fund help authors, translators find a publisher?
Yeah, and then I don't know.
A lot of these funds, as well endowed as they are, don't necessarily have enough employees with the know-how to do that second part, to help find publishers in the U.S. I mean, that takes years of experience and contact building to get that done, and to be able to do it over many years and be successful at it. It's just not an easy thing. And so I can understand why these funds in these places would not feel confident even trying to do something like that. Especially, I mean, that's money that could go to the translators, right? That's right. The way of looking at it. And so how do they do that? And I think a lot of them just say, you know what, we're not going to do this. So
yeah, it's part of it is like the easiest ways would be like the booklets of samples, or like there's different magazines that places create. So like the Danish Arts Council makes one, or whatever they're called, that comes out quarterly and has like information about a number of recent books and sample translations, and that's supposed to go out to like all the editors and everyone to like create a network so that we're getting information to look at of things that are being published or that are available. Another way is that a lot of the countries sponsor those editor trips. So you go to wherever, to Korea, and learn about Korean literature and culture and meet with the people and start creating that network. One thing that would be more effective, you would think, and this is something that Michael Reynolds, to bring him back up, and I've talked about before, is that he was suggesting that we try and get his idea is that a number of these countries could come together and help fund someone who is essentially a permanent translation public relations officer of sorts, and would be helping do PR and get a lot more attention for the translations that are published. And therefore, by getting more attention for those, the sales are better and publishers are more willing to do more books, and that this would be like an investment in the future of reading, more so than just throwing money at the translation, which is what the other side of that is, or the other problem. And that's not a bad idea either. I don't know that any of these groups can actually work together well enough to do something like that, or that you could get the right person who would be able to do all the publicity and be able to help really impact the sales for translations from, even if it's just from a handful of countries. But it's nice to think that there would be some money could be put towards marketing and publicity efforts, and not solely the translation fund.
Yes, absolutely. Because you're right. In the end, what's going to help more books get translated is sales.
Yeah.
Not just it's not a snowball effect. If there are more translations, there will be more translations. You need to actually sell some of these books in the process, right?
Right. Hopefully a few.
We can go back just a second. My and like I said, I've never really been an acquiring editor. I know what happens. I see what goes on. I am incredibly skeptical of, like you said, state-run sort of things. I'm skeptical of my own government as well. But when a state-sponsored list of books comes around, I'm going to be very skeptical. I'm going to think, well, clearly you have, chosen what you think are the most palatable, boring things to show to American audiences. And you've clearly cut out anything that would be incendiary or, controversial in any way, shape, or form, which to me make for very interesting books. So what I prefer is what you're talking about, and I know the French do this, is send, Barbara went just last year, they pay for these trips where all they do is pay for the trip and then set up meetings with the individual publishers, right? That way the government does not get involved in any way, shape, or form in trying to guide you to choose a particular book of any kind, right? You can go and meet with any publisher, and Barbara had like 20 meetings in 4 days.
That's right. Yeah, I went there a couple of years ago and did that same thing. Yeah.
I imagine it's exhausting. And
yep.
You can talk about front list, you can talk about back list, you can talk about every genre you want, but it's up to you in the end. And there's no pressure. There's pressure from the rights people.
Yeah.
But the French government, they're just there to facilitate this, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is an ideal way of doing it. Building bridges, just trying to get people to talk, people who hadn't talked before. And then, if something gets a contract, they can step in with some money for the translation to help out there too.
Although to defend there's, a lot of these places don't have necessarily lists that they're like the approved books or anything like that, but they're more often like agencies like the German Book Office that has that like new books from Germany, and they'll run like 10 reviews of books that have come out within the past year that they think are of interest. They tend to be not so much like the money might come from the government, but a lot of those employees are just people that are connected to literary things. So more often it seems like it's like friends of friends is a bigger problem than the government's imposition. But that depends, I guess, too, on what government you're talking about. Like certain countries that you could, like if North Korea had a sponsorship thing, that would be very suspect. Germany less so. So it depends on like the political situation in that country. But a lot of times these people that are working for those things and they're helping like promote the books, they're just like readers. They're just curators. They're not even like, they have no directive from like the government. A lot of times it's just, I think more frequently what happens is like, oh, that's my friend edited that book, or like that's my friend that I know that I've worked with for years. Like if we were to put together a list of like books to recommend of American authors to foreign presses, it'd be like, oh, well, Mark Bonelli should be on there. And people are just like, oh, I know these people and I like these people in these presses, therefore I'm going to promote them. I think it's more on that level and less so of like, we want to take away, or we don't want people to know about these sorts of books.
And you're absolutely right. And having witnessed, the way the Germans do it and the way the French do it in terms of publishing, yes, the people who work in like the German Book Office or the French book department are just book people. They really are. They were editors or academics, or they just really like literature. They're not pushing some agenda. That said, there is, they have budget meetings and they have to, explain what they've spent their money on in the past year. And if their results are not, ideal, then they are instructed, guided. It is suggested that they promote things that are less, obscure, that sort of thing. So
yeah. I wonder, do you know from like, I'm always curious about this, and I'm sure that we could get the number pretty easily, but like with the German Book Office is maybe the most straightforward because the French Cultural Services doesn't have a publication that's as straightforward as New Books from German. But like what percentage of the books that have been in New Books from German over the past 10 years have been published, have been translated and published? I'd be curious to know like what their success rate is.
To me, it doesn't seem that high, but I could be. I mean, maybe their threshold for success is actually, 1 in 10. I don't know.
Yeah, that's quite possible. It's kind of crazy to think about, though. a weird number, but yeah. Anyways, I'm looking at their thing though, and they have like 30 books that are in the new new books from German. So who knows? But anyway, I don't think I have anything else to add to that particular bit.
No, it's just another one of those things that there are so many, when you deal with things like translated literature, it's quite difficult to mesh all of these very different cultures and finances and agendas and things like that across, because it's not as easy as showing art around the world, right? Most art it does not require a language. You just look at it. Films, they put the words in subtitles, and you still get the images to come across. But books, I mean, there's a time and serious cost spent on translating something, and so it requires a lot more finesse in the movement from culture to culture, and because of that, it's an incredibly complex business, and that keeps happening. I have no idea why. And it's just interesting. And we're going to end up debating this for the rest of time, I think. How do we improve it? How do we make it better? How do we make it easier? And we'll never probably figure out the ideal situation for all of these things that we talk about. But
here's a one last note that I think is funny for this too. Is I was just looking at this new books from German. I clicked on Clemens Setz. I think that's how you say his name. He had a book come out from Norton a couple of years ago called Indigo that I really liked. And I don't think anyone read it, but it's fucking weird. It's like one of the weirdest books I've ever read. And he's really literary in like a Nabokov sort of vein. And they compare him to David Foster Wallace, which I suppose so too. But he's like, tricksy and interesting in doing things with language, and not for everyone. Okay, so his new book is on here, The Hour Between Woman and Guitar. And it's like, I wonder if the rights to this would be available, because I don't think Norton did particularly well with the last one, so probably no one's going to do it. This book is fucking 1,021 pages long. And there's another author, Olga Tokarczyk, who's Polish, who I've read one of her books, and I really liked it. And we've always been sort of interested in looking at some of her other books. And she just won this big prize, the Nikkei Prize in Poland. And her book is 1,000 pages long, too. So like, these are situations in which those books are probably never going to exist in English, because the cost of doing that is astronomical. Like if this is an important enough book, they would just have to flat out pay the translator whatever that would be, like $40,000 to translate this book. Like the whole thing is that's an insane situation. Like those books are just never going to be available to us at all.
No, it's absolutely true. That's such a long book. I mean, that is 25,000 maybe to pay that translator on the low end.
I think it'd be more than that, because we've done for a 600-page book. That's usually what that ends up being.
Wow. Okay.
So so I'd say it's probably like closer to 30, 35. I mean, and it would be like, it would say you did translate that. If you could translate 100 pages a month, which is insane, you could maybe finish it in a year. So it'd be like a year's worth of work.
Yeah.
That's wild. It makes me want to just only do those books. Just do one book a year, and it's that. It's like a 1,000-page epic novel.
That's your new publishing model.
That's a new publishing model. One book a year, giant. That would never, there's nothing you could do. There's no way this book would ever sell enough copies to break even. Like that,
no.
The profit and loss numbers will never work for this.
No, not even close.
Which is really unfortunate in some ways, because this sounds like it would be super cool, but unfortunate. There is, there are funding sources for things like that, though, that exist. So maybe someday.
Someday you can set up your one book a year, 1,000-page minimum.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Has there anything that you've read recently that you're big on?
I'm still reading Chris Kraus. I finished Summer of Hate and then walked down to Greenlight, which is down the street from my apartment, and bought a copy of I Love Dick, and I'm reading that now. Cool. I've fallen into an obsession with Chris Kraus, unfortunately. which I say only because she is an amazing writer and an amazing like cultural observer, but it's devastating at the same time. Like it's the kind of it's very smart and a little too like acutely observed. The way she talks about relationships and about society in general, you're just like, God, this is depressing. Like it's heavy stuff. It's you can only read like 15 pages at a time, and then I find myself on the train just sort of closing the book and staring into space for a couple minutes, like just like, oh God, it's like soul crushing,
man.
But it is really brilliant.
That's great. Yeah, I finally finished our Guillermo Sacamano Gessel Dome book that's 740 pages long. So there you go. So it fit in our gigantic book sequence, and that was fantastic. I had put it down after because I was reading it, and then when I went on vacation, I only had like the manuscript pages. I was like, "There's no way I'm taking these into like camping in the woods. That sounds like a terrible idea." And then I had to just set it aside for a while and worked on other things, and went back and finished it since we have sales conference next week, and it's intense. Like, it's all about this one, I think I've talked about it on here before, but it's about this one city that really does exist that's like a resort city in Argentina. And so for like 3 months of the year, everyone, makes all their money. There's all kinds of things going on. There's thousands of visitors. I think it even says in there's like 2 million visitors. But then once everyone leaves, there's 100,000 people in the city, and it's like corrupt. It's got like a sort of True Detective vibe of like everyone's. So the people in charge are very corrupt and don't care really about their citizens. And there's endless amounts of crime and brutality and people cheating on each other. And like all the stories is told in like a mosaic pattern, sort of like John Dos Passos's Big Money trilogy. I think that's what it's called. The USA trilogy, of which Big Money is part of it, where it'll be like a little clip of the story, an interjection of something else, someone's like first-person account of something that they're working on, then back to that original story. So like this, all the different threads are like spread out over tens of pages. Each one is just like brutal, and like it's sort of at times it's very funny too. But it's a really cool book. It's a giant. It's going to be a massive book when we get this thing out. But it's one that I think a lot of people will like because you can easily fall into it. It's not off-putting. Even though, aside from its size, it's not off-putting in any way. It's just a bunch of voices of these people who, shit happens to.
So is that your rave?
I suppose that's my rave.
You don't have a rant?
Not today. I'm too sick to rant.
I do have a rave. I wanted to mention. It's unfortunate that it took this long to come out. But New York Review of Books recently re-released in a very, you know what their covers look like, but this one, it looks pretty great. Fat City. Do you know this book?
Wait, what was it?
Fat City?
No, I don't think so.
Leonard Gardner is the author. It's a book about a aging boxer.
Oh.
Who takes on a sort of protege, but you end up seeing the aging guy's sort of really sad sort of existence with his partner. They argue all the time, they get drunk, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it's an amazing book. It was made into a movie starring Stacy Keach. I don't know if you know who that is. He was on like some sitcom in the 80s, but way back when he was in I think it was directed by John Huston. Let me check on this. But
it is directed by John Huston, and Jeff Bridges is in it as
Jeff
well.
Bridges in his first role, who I think was like 18 at the time, plays the young boxer.
Wow.
Anyway, so I bought a copy yesterday, even though I've already read it. I have no idea what happened to my other copy. I think it was just really beat up. And only now, this is how little I think of introductions actually sell books. Maybe it's just me. Only now that I noticed that the introduction is by Dennis Johnson. So yeah. I'm actually going to read the introduction. So.
He was just here.
You told me. Someday I'm going to meet Dennis Johnson.
He said that he really doesn't do very many readings mostly because people just never ask him.
Is that wait what?
That's what he told, because they were like he gives like 4 readings a year, I guess. And they asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, it's because no one really ever asks me." which is probably like maybe not true, is maybe whatever, but yeah.
It's like a weird self-fulfilling prophecy. We all think he's going to say no, so no one asks him.
That's what I would assume too. Yeah.
All right. When I open my bookstore, first email that's going out is inviting Dennis Johnson.
It would have been cool. I guess I guess they didn't have a ton of people show up for it too. You could have like really hung out with them.
Got to know him?
Yeah. Alas.
Just one last thing, since we're talking about Dennis Johnson. I was recently everyone knows I love Dennis Johnson. I was recently sent a picture of a shirtless, wearing bathing trunks, sitting on a yacht photo of James Bond era Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Reading, it was obviously Photoshop, reading Tree of Smoke.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
Why, of all the books, the Photoshop in this, because he was clearly reading a book. Like,
yeah.
If you look at the original photo, he's like reading a leather-bound thing that you can't make out the title or whatever. Mm-hmm. Who chose Tree of Smoke? It's very, very strange. The internet is a strange, strange place.
Yes, it is. Very much is. I have one funny thing I'm just going to ask you because this surprised me. So this past weekend, I watched with the kids Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure because they had never heard of it, but they got like this T-shirt that referenced Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and they're like confused. So we watched this. Do you know what the rating was for that on Netflix, like of stars? Like how many stars it got according to Netflix when I went to look it up?
Not 5?
1.5.
What?
1.5 stars for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. If I have a rant, it's what the fuck is that? Like that doesn't. I mean, it's not. I mean, it could be a 5, 4, any number that's like more than 1.5.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
This movie was insanely popular. I love that movie.
The movie's great. It's really, I forgot, like, I mean, there's some certain parts that are really wacky, but it's fun, and the kids loved it. It's got some weird slow moments now that nowadays you would just be like, wow, that doesn't need to happen. But I saw that, and then I took my daughter to her book club movie thing where they watched the Scorch Trials, which is awful. And by contrast, Bill and Ted just ruled. But I also am not sure if on Netflix it's giving you stars from people or what it predicts you will like.
It gives you both. Let me look.
Because mine still says just 1.5 stars. I'm going to mark it 5 stars and try and change this.
Let me see. What is? I'm hoping that now that we've gotten into this horrible Keanu Reeves early 80s thing. But I was just thinking, for whatever reason, I associate Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I don't know why. Huh. They're totally unrelated. One has Sean, one is Keanu Reeves. But I always think of them as like the same. So, what movie were we talking about? Bill and Ted.
Bill and Ted. Which reminds me of Point Break, which I saw the trailer for the new Point Break movie, and it looked pretty awesome, actually.
Okay, look, I love the original more than probably anyone, partly because he's Johnny Utah and he went to Ohio State in the movie.
Oh,
partly
right.
Because Anthony Kiedis has a cameo in there. It's a great movie. And my friends are like, oh, the new one looks terrible. It looks awful. And I watched it. I was like, I'm going to see this. This looks great.
It looks like it's got a lot of great adventure sequences. They're like,
yes,
like more than anything. Yeah.
And they're anarchists. I'm totally into this.
Yeah.
But no, that's 1.5 stars are user other people's ratings. That is not recommended.
What the shit?
I don't know.
It makes no sense.
It's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's so weird.
It's not possible to hate that.
It's not so possible. Inoffensive. If you want to hate on like bad, I'm trying to think of like movies, anything with Pauly Shore.
Oh my god!
But
Encino Man.
Encino Man.
Oh man, Pauly Shore has a lot more movies than I thought he did.
I'm not going to look it up. I don't want to know.
Yeah, you don't want to know. You just don't. But anyways, yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to this week's podcast. I'll talk to you later, man.
Okay.
Bye.
So I called up the place where the party was. They hadn't seen it either. I asked them to check the medicine cabinet because for some reason I leave it there sometimes, but not this time. So so I told them if it pops up to let me know. I called a few people who were at the party, but they were no help either. I was starting to get desperate. I really don't like being without my penis for too long. It makes me feel like less of a man, and I really hate having to sit down every time I take a leak.
Business.